brace yourself for a mind-blowing journey through the secrets of ancient civilizations, as unraveled by the one and only Joe Rogan. What if everything we thought we knew about history was just the tip of the iceberg? From sunken cities to unbelievable technologies, the truth about our ancestors might be far stranger than fiction. And could the legends of Atlantis be more than mere myths? Join us as we count down the top 5 shocking revelations about ancient civilizations that Joe Rogan has uncovered, starting with a bombshell that will leave you questioning everything you've ever been taught.
Yeah, people can develop these patterns of behavior that are destructive with anything, whether it's with alcohol or cannabis or,
Yes.
sex or anything. People get in ruts.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't mean that the cannabis is bad. It means that you are on a bad mental path.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm not encouraging it for everybody because some people it genuinely biologically doesn't jive with them.
Yeah. But the fundamental thing is we as adult human beings need to take responsibility for our own lives and our own decisions. And we need not hand that responsibility over to governmental institutions, especially when it concerns something as intimate and personal as our consciousness. And my view is the ancient world had the right attitude to this kind of thing, and the modern world does not, and that we can sit down and learn a lot from the ancient world. A lot of people ask me, Hancock, you've been arguing that there's been a lost civilization in the human story, but what sort of civilization do you think it was? Well, one of the things I think is it was a civilization that used psychedelics. I think it was a civilization that emerged from shamanism, but did not stay at the hunter-gatherer stage, but that took the essence of shamanism and integrated it into a very different kind of civilization from our own, which pursued things in different ways. A lot of archaeologists have said to me, but we don't find any plastic bottles from the Ice Age. That means there was no advanced civilization during the Ice Age. Well, hang on. Maybe an advanced civilization might have decided never to get involved in plastic in the first place. Maybe there would have been a clear choice not to make plastic. Maybe they did things in completely different ways. Maybe they cultivated powers of the human mind that we dismiss and regard as completely unimportant. Woo-woo.
Yeah, this is the thoughts about Egypt, correct?
It's about Egypt and about other things. I mean, the specific example I give is above the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid are 5 further chambers. And these chambers are roofed and floored with granite beams that weigh about 70 tons each. And there are hundreds of them. And these 70-ton granite beams, which to put in context, a 70-ton beam is equivalent in weight to 35 large SUVs. These 70-ton granite beams have been elevated to a height of more than 350 feet above the ground and carefully and precisely placed in position. It is very hard for archaeologists to explain how that was done using purely leverage and mechanical advantage. You can say, perhaps they built a ramp and hauled the stones up the ramp. But then you have to confront basic laws of physics. You can't haul a stone weighing tens of tons up a slope that exceeds 10 degrees. Then you start doing the calculation. How long a ramp do I need with a 10-degree slope to get to 350 feet above the ground? And the answer is you need a fucking long ramp, which should still be there, because it couldn't have been a sand ramp. It would have collapsed under the weight of those stones. It had to be as massive as the pyramid itself. So this begins to seem like an absurd idea, the idea that is foisted on us by archaeology. Maybe the idea that they regard as absurd, namely that psychic powers were cultivated by ancient civilizations, that they could use powers of the human mind that we have allowed to lapse. Maybe that idea deserves further consideration. We have gone down a path of leverage and mechanical advantage. We're used to relying on machines, but we hear anecdotal reports of people who have telekinetic powers, who can move things with their minds, of people who have telepathic powers. And our automatic reaction is to just dismiss all of that because science says it's impossible, because science regards consciousness as local to the brain and doesn't see how it can exert itself outside of that. But maybe we should open up to those possibilities, that we're dealing with a very different kind of culture that used techniques that we have allowed to lapse. And maybe we could wake those techniques up again. Maybe the ability of human beings to do almost superhuman things is resident within all of us, but sleeping.
Well, it's pure speculation that they use some sort of a telekinetic power, but it's
Pure
absolute,
speculation.
But it's absolute that they did something that we don't understand. If you think about the distance between us and the construction, just the modern accepted construction dates of the Great Pyramid, it's more than 5,000 years ago, or close to 5,000 years ago.
Great Pyramid is supposed to be about 4,500 years old, yeah.
That's really old.
It's incredibly
It's
old, yeah.
To think that someone back then could do something that would perplex us today
Yeah.
with modern machinery.
Yeah.
And that somehow or another they figured this out. It's almost like what they had done was leave behind something that was so stupendous, so monstrously impressive that it would transcend time.
Yeah.
And that you would have to look at it even thousands and thousands of years later and say, hey, like this defies
Yes.
conventional explanation. This is not a simple, and I've seen some of the conventional explanations of the construction of the pyramid, and they conveniently neglect those chambers above the king's chamber.
They do.
They conveniently neglect a lot of those massive stones.
Yeah.
And it's because it's one of those things you just go, oh, I don't know. What is this, Jamie?
There are the chambers
is,
above
yeah.
the king's chambers, and each one of those floors consists of a row of 70-ton granite blocks that have been raised 350 feet above the ground, and not only that, but brought from Aswan in the south of Egypt, 500 kilometers south of the Great Pyramid. So,
if there's any time in history where you could go in a time machine and go back and observe, would that be the time?
I am just completely fascinated by the Ice Age at the moment.
If you had one shot to go back and see what it was like in some place, you wouldn't go to the construction of the Great Pyramids?
I think right now where I'd go is 12,800 years ago in the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
Just to see.
Because I think that's where the whole human story changes. I think that's where we change tracks from one path to another path. And following those cataclysmic events of the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, following those, the signs of civilization that we see emerging are not the beginnings of civilization. They're a restarting of civilization that had existed before the cataclysm. And for that reason, I would like to be present during that cataclysmic event, if only to satisfy myself that it was indeed a comet. You see, the one thing there's no dispute about anymore is that the Younger Dryas was a cataclysm. You can't argue about that. The megafauna that die off, the disruption of human activity that takes place at that time, the huge climate changes. This was a cataclysm by any standards. Where the argument still goes on is what caused the cataclysm. I vote strongly for comet, multiple fragments of a comet hitting the North American ice cap and hitting Greenland as well. But there are other researchers in the field, like my colleague Robert Schoch, who thinks that the sun is more involved. This is healthy. This is very, very healthy, that we should be approaching this problem from many different perspectives and trying to figure out what the fuck caused this extraordinary event that occurs at a pivotal moment in the human story. The end of the Stone Age, the beginning of the Mesolithic, the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the current age of the Earth. And suddenly we see these signs of civilization appearing, and in places like Göbekli Tepe, those signs already include highly sophisticated knowledge. And that's why I feel we really need to investigate the Amazon. There are 3 places in the world which are really lacking in the investigation right now. One of them is the Amazon, 5.5 million square kilometers, very little archaeology done. Another is the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert, tough place to work. I can understand why there's little archaeology done there, but the Sahara Desert was green during the Ice Age. It had a completely different climate regime. We should consider the possibility that missing parts of the human story are there. And then under the continental shelves, because sea level rose 400 feet. These are 3 domains that archaeology has largely not investigated, and it has largely not done so. They say, well, why would we spend the money on marine archaeology? It's much better to spend it on looking for shipwrecks rather than...
Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock explore the mind-blowing possibility that a lost ancient civilization possessed abilities and knowledge far beyond what we imagine. Did they use psychedelics to enhance consciousness and harness powers like telekinesis? The conversation challenges mainstream explanations for ancient wonders, hinting at forgotten technologies and ways of being that defy our understanding. Number 2 will leave you stunned.
technology is cheap now to get. So even if you were to show up with $2,000 worth of equipment, you could see if there was some scientific basis to what these people are doing. But from my understanding, I didn't go down the chi hole too deep, but a lot of these people aren't showing up and offering, volunteering to have their skills tested, and that's how science works. You have to test it, right? And it has to be replicable.
Well, everybody wants to be Swami Rama, but nobody wants to do what Swami Rama did, right?
Yeah, who wants to sit in a cave? Well, some people do. Sit in a cave for 30 years, right?
Yeah.
He would go away for years at a time in a dark cave and just sit there and breathe. So in the modern age, I just don't know.
Freak that guy must have been. God, I would love to have talked to him.
Yeah, he had it all down.
Because there are people that can do that. They're like the Unabomber of breathing. They just move to the woods and but without the negativity.
But what was cool about him is he wasn't the only one who could do this. So there were researchers in the 20s and in the 40s who went out with a bunch of equipment, whatever equipment they could cobble together, and tested other yogis who were able to do this exact same thing, right? So Swami was part of this long lineage of people who had this knowledge. Is it still there? It could be, but again, I don't think it's online. I think you really have to get out in the weeds and earn these people's trust in order to get that story.
And what is the history of these people doing this? Like, what was their initial motivation? I mean, is there a written history of this?
The earliest evidence that we have for breathing practices dates back about 4,000 or 5,000 years from these little statuettes in the Indus Valley, which is in northern India. So there was this huge thriving civilization. They had paved roads, they had running water, they were dealing with tin and copper, and they had in this whole civilization, they still have not found any political or governmental buildings. They haven't found any religious iconography. So these people in some ways could have been more advanced than we are now. And they had all of these figures of these people in these yoga poses with their stomachs out. So that's how they date the earliest archaeological evidence of that. And since then all of these practices were moved into the Rig Veda and all of the earliest yoga texts, and they were codified in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. That's where a lot of the yoga methods come from, and that's about 2,000 years old. So
the methods predate all of that?
Oh, I'm sure they predate probably anything that has been in writing.
That's what's so curious to me. What makes me so curious, if you really think about what life must have been like back then, when they were creating this, you would think that people were hunting and gathering, and it was probably a very hard life.
Well, not in that civilization.
Right, but they got to a point where they had some sort of agriculture or some structures and buildings. But how did they get to the point? Because the rest of the world obviously didn't do this. This is not like common practice in Germany or in Italy or in all these other civilizations. Like, what made these people focus on breath work so much?
Well, it could have been, but we just haven't found anything related to that yet, right? So if you think about hunter-gatherers, we're imagining them as, man, they're just working all day, they're hunting all day, they're gathering. They weren't, from what I know and from what I've seen of the science there. Probably 3 or 4 hours of work, and then you have no other distractions to spend time and build these systems of breathing and health, which is what started in ancient China, which is what started in India, which is what started in ancient Greece. Think about all the distractions we're dealing with today. Constant interruptions. If you've already done your work for the day, and there's nothing else to do, you're going to get more interested, and you're going to have the time to do some empirical studies to see what works and what doesn't.
It just seems to me that, like, learning something like that, learning something like prolonged breath work and the benefits of it, I mean, it seems like this is a really long-term practice that doesn't show you immediate benefits.
Yes and no. I think that you can take someone who has a serious problem, maybe someone who's already very fit. It's going to take a while to really see those big benefits. We see that with athletes with nasal breathing. It takes them weeks or sometimes months to really see gains in performance. But if you've got someone with a chronic condition like asthma or anxiety who are struggling to breathe every single day, and you teach them some basic breathing, some normal breathing patterns, their lives can be absolutely transformed. And we've seen this in study after study. So these people, their breathing has become so disrupted.
Breathe like the ancients for a healthier life. Joe Rogan explores how civilizations in the Indus Valley and Greece used advanced breathing techniques that may surpass modern practices. Discover the wisdom passed down through generations and lost in today's distractions. Number 3 reveals even more.
Concept that we have been visited, and that's how all these things were built, and that this technology was brought here from another world. And I think he's very ideologically locked into these ideas. And I think a much more compelling idea is that there were very advanced cultures for some reason 10,000 years ago, whatever it was, whatever the year was where they built some of the insane structures. It's 4,500 years ago, they roughly think the pyramids were built. Like whatever the fuck was going on there, I think those were human beings. I think those were human beings in that place, in that time. And I think they had some sort of very sophisticated technology that was lost. And things can get lost. Things can get lost in cataclysms. Things can get lost in... They can get lost in disease and famine, and there's all sorts of war, all sorts of reasons. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, there's all sorts of ways that technology gets lost forever. And you can have today someone living in Los Angeles in the most sophisticated high-tech society the world has ever known, while you still have people that live in the Amazon that live in the same way that they have lived for thousands of years. So those things can happen in the same planet at the same time. And I think while the rest of the world was essentially operating at a much lower vibration, there were people in Egypt that were doing some extraordinary things. I don't know how they got the information. Maybe they did get it from visitors. Maybe they did. But there's no real compelling evidence that they did. I think there's much more compelling evidence that a cataclysm happened. When you look at the Younger Dryas impact theory, it's all entirely based on science. It's entirely based on core samples and iridium content and also massive changes in the environment over a very short period of time, particularly the melting of the ice caps in North America and just impact craters all around the world that we know something happened roughly 11,000 years ago, and probably again 10,000 years ago. I think it's a regular occurrence on this planet that things go sideways and there's massive natural disasters, and I think that it's very likely that...
There's the Bronze Age civilization collapse somewhere in the mid 12th century BC, and probably the in some ways the one in which we have the best history is the fall of the Roman Empire, which was obviously the culmination of the classical world, and it's somehow extremely unraveled. So I think my view on it is probably somewhere between yours and the
Von Daniken?
No, not Von Daniken. I'm more on the the other side. But let me try to define why this. We can probably agree on why this is so important today. This is not just of antiquarian interest, and the reason it matters today is because the alternative. If you say civilization has seen great rises and falls. It's gone through these great cycles. Maybe the Bronze Age civilizations were very advanced, but someone came up with iron weapons. So there was just one dimension where they progressed, but then everything else they could destroy. And so, the fall of the Roman Empire was again this pretty cataclysmic thing where there were diseases and then there were political things that unraveled, but somehow, it was a massive regression for 400, 500, 600 years into the Dark Ages, and the sort of naive, the progressive views, things always just got monotonically better, and there's sort of this revisionist purely progressive history where even the Roman Empire didn't decline. And even, this one sort of stupid way to quantify this stuff is with pure demographics. And so it's the question, how many people lived in the past? And the rises and falls of civilization story is there were more people who lived in the Roman Empire because it was more advanced, it could support a larger population, and then the population declined. The city of Rome maybe had 1 million people at its peak, and then by 650 AD, it's down to 10,000 people or less. You have this complete collapse in population, and then the sort of alternate, purely progressive view is the population has always just been monotonically increasing because it's a measure of how, in some sense, things in aggregate have always been getting better. So I am definitely on your side that population had great rises and falls, civilizations had great rises and falls, and so that part of it, I agree with you, or even some variant of what Hancock or von Daniken say. The place where I would say I think things are different is I don't think and therefore it seems possible something could happen to our civilization. That's always the upshot of it. If it had been monotonically always progressing, then there's nothing we should worry about. Nothing can possibly go wrong. And then certainly the thing the sort of alternate Hancock, von Daniken, Joe Rogan History of the World tells us is that we shouldn't take our civilization for granted. There's things that can go really haywire. I agree with that. The one place where I differ is I do think our civilization today is on some dimensions way more advanced than any of these past civilizations were. I don't think any of them had nuclear weapons. I don't think any of them had spaceships or anything like that. And so the failure mode is likely to be somewhat different from these past ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think technology progressed in a different direction. That's what I think. I think structural technology, building technology, had somehow or another achieved levels of competence that's not available today. When you look at the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, there's 2,300,000 stones in it. The whole thing points to due north, south, east, and west. It's an incredible achievement. The stones, some of them were moved from a quarry that was 500 miles away through the mountains. They have no idea how they did it. Massive stones. The ones inside the King's Chamber, where they're the biggest ones are 80 tons. It's crazy. The whole thing's crazy. How did they do that? What?
Brace yourself. Joe Rogan explores the mind-blowing possibility that ancient civilizations possessed lost knowledge and technologies that allowed them to achieve the impossible. Could cataclysmic events like the Younger Dryas have erased their incredible advancements? Don't take progress for granted. History reveals cycles of rise and fall. Number 4 will shock you.
A lot of people that live in the city eventually wind up going the opposite. They wind up going to a fucking house in the country.
I'm dying to get out.
I have, yeah.
It's funny. I feel like when I grew up in Whitman, small town, and I was obsessed with Springsteen, get out of this town, born to run, and I did it, and now I still listen to Springsteen and still get moved, but now it's I got to get a home with grass and see the stars. It's the same motivation, but before it was to go to the city, but now I want to be in the country.
Yeah, my friend Jeff has always been this die-hard New York City guy. I love the energy of this city. He's lived there his whole life. And then he got a place on Fire Island. And it's I couldn't live in the city if I didn't have this place now. Because
no, it keeps you able to. I can stay in the city because I have my place upstate.
Yeah, you get that decompression.
Yeah.
That's what I found. Well, I moved to Colorado for a brief amount of time. In 2009, I lived in Gold Hill, which is 3,000 feet above Boulder. I went full out, 148 acres, log house, the whole deal. But my wife got pregnant, and you can't, if you are a person who lives at sea level and you go to 8,000 feet and you're pregnant, it's you have the flu every day.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
She was wrecked. And then we went back to LA for a few days, and she was normal. And then I realized, fuck. and so
Yeah.
we had to bail.
Can't do it.
Yeah, it was rough.
No, it was good.
But
parenting.
man, living up there was fucking magical. It was like everything just went.
Well, human animals were part of the earth.
Yeah.
It's our home, and cities are not natural.
Right.
You don't see it's man-made lighting. As soon as it gets dark, it's man-made lighting everywhere, and you have to turn off the lights to find darkness. You don't have this this thing of like, there's certain parts of the day where the breeze comes. Like if you live anywhere on a coast, there's a sea breeze, and then there's the hot part of the day, and there's you're watching the grass go green and then gray. You're watching the trees die. It's part of it tells you your brain how life works. I think it makes you less afraid of dying, that you watch everything die and renew every year, and you get a sense of what speed you're actually supposed to be running at, because the city life and also the online life and the phone life is overworking everybody's brains and their systems. People are texting right before bedtime, and it's just but being out there in nature where it's like, no, it's getting dark, cool off, it's getting dark. There's no sense of getting dark in the city. It's you're watching the world go to sleep, and then the different sounds you're hearing, the birds go to bed and then insects come out. All those things are reminding you how your system actually, what's going on in your chemistry is connected to all that.
Yeah. There's also a thing about going into the woods and being around nature where it's like a nourishment that your body's not normally getting. Mm-hmm. It's like you feel like you're getting like a little something like, oh yeah, I need this. Like there's something in this that like your body is supposed to interface with.
Yeah, it's good for your physical health. There's all these studies.
Yeah.
Not just your mental health.
Well, if people don't see the sun for a certain amount of time, they go insane. So if you think about the original people, they saw that 6 sky of stars, like that really full sky of stars, was normal for every human being to see that every night.
Yeah.
And a lot of people never see it. Never see one star. If you live in a city, you don't see the night sky.
Unless it's Los Angeles. You see stars everywhere there.
Yes.
Blah, blah, blah.
Killing their wives and the guy.
I
and
went
their
to
friends.
Hawaii once, went to the Keck Observatory. It's on the Big Island, and it's way up there. You have to drive literally through the clouds. As we were driving, I was like, fuck, it's cloudy. This is going to suck. We're not going to see anything. And then you literally drive through the clouds, and the image that you get, because the Big Island uses all diffused lighting because of the Keck Observatory. So when you get up there, the view, we are at like 13,000 feet or something like that. The view of space is insane. You really feel like you're in a spaceship. You don't feel like you're on Earth anymore. You feel like you're in a ship with a glass ceiling, and you're just passing through the Milky Way. I mean, it's fucking wonderful.
Yeah, because we're used to this perspective that you're standing on Earth, and that's up, but we're really looking across at other people, and you're looking down at the Earth that you're tacked down to. But in reality, you're hanging upside down.
Yeah.
And you're really hanging out into everything in the whole universe. It's not above your head. If you look like this, that's the really correct perspective.
Yeah.
Well,
that's why all these ancient cultures were obsessed with constellations, and we don't give a fuck about them.
That's why they built shit like that to get up there.
Yeah, and also built things that mimicked the constellations, like the Mayans and the Egyptians. The way they formulated their structures, it all aligned with certain constellations, and it was very important to them.
Well, think about back when people before there was like skyscrapers, airplanes, that you couldn't go up. You could only go like 6 feet high.
Right.
And you could maybe build something that was like, I don't know, like a castle.
Yeah.
That's kind of high. But those pyramids, and I know I sound like an idiot.
It sounds like you guys fucking dropped acid while I was watching OJ. I just got wacky in here. That was hills, this mountains, right?
Yes.
Mountains are high.
Yeah,
no, but they're high, and you don't have like a drop, or you're not really seeing.
Right.
And also, unless you lived in the mountains, then that became normal.
Right.
But the ability to go, let's go way the fuck up there and see from up there and feel like where is the sky start?
Yeah. It's also very humbling to people to be to encounter like undeniable majesty, like the insane majesty of the universe. Like that's how people are like around mountains, around the ocean, things that are so epic that it's like it calms people down in a way. That's why people are so chill around beaches.
Yeah, it
like
heals.
beach communities are always like kind of relaxed.
Yeah, this thing is telling you over and over again.
You ain't
there's
shit.
a force that it doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't
Yeah.
give a fuck. You're a speck, and there's this.
Disconnect from the urban jungle and rediscover your primal connection with nature. Joe Rogan explores how ancient civilizations integrated the cosmos into their daily lives, finding peace and perspective that modern city life often lacks. When was the last time you stood beneath a star-filled sky, humbled by the vastness of the universe? If this idea ignites your curiosity, smash that like button and subscribe for more mind-expanding revelations. Let us know in the comments, have we lost touch with nature's rhythms, or is that connection still within reach? Get ready for number 5 because it will leave you in awe.
Said honestly, we don't have a proper explanation for it at the moment. But what he did say is that the most parsimonious explanation, he used that specific word, the most parsimonious explanation is that a group of people during the Ice Age crossed the Pacific Ocean and settled up and ended up in South America and settled in the Amazon and brought their DNA with them. That would account perfectly for the DNA data. And when a scientist says the most parsimonious explanation, what that scientist is saying is he likes that explanation, that it's a simple, direct, clear explanation of the DNA mystery. But then he added, however, it doesn't make practical sense. And I asked him, well, why doesn't it make practical sense? And he said, because the archaeologists tell me that no human population was capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age, at which point it was natural for me to say, do you really trust the archaeologists? And he said, well, in science, we do trust the work of other scientists. We don't really question it. We don't really investigate it. That's their side of the business. And my view is that is rather than taking this weird, anomalous Australasian DNA signal in the heart of the Amazon as something to be explained away and as something to be for it to be denied that it could be connected to a voyage across the Pacific Ocean. Maybe it's the first compelling evidence that voyages were taking place across the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age. And maybe we should be opening up that whole issue for exploration. And again, I think a lost civilization is the best answer. And that near the end of the Ice Age, when the Younger Dryas cataclysm unfolds, it's not an overnight thing. It's very bad 12,800 years ago. There's about 1,200 years of horror. I don't think the civilization went down in a single day and night. I think there were survivors. I think bits of it were left. I think their project was to restart civilization. And I suggest very strongly that where they tried to mount that project was amongst the hunter-gatherers who coexisted in the world with them at that time. We ourselves are an advanced civilization, at least that's what we call ourselves, and we coexist in the world with hunter-gatherers. It's not an odd idea that an advanced civilization and hunter-gatherers should coexist, and there is separation between us and the Amazonian hunter-gatherers. There are tribes in the Amazon that are uncontacted and that we don't know even exist. If a catastrophe on the level of the Younger Dryas were to occur today, I don't think that our civilization would make it through. We are the spoilt children of the earth. We are just used to having everything laid on. You know, the supermarket shelves are groaning with food. We can get food delivered to our homes. We have roofs over our head. We have shelters. We have clothing. Everything is taken for granted. I guess you're an exception, but very few people in modern Western culture know how to survive. They don't have survival skills. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to gather. They don't know how to grow crops because they've handed that responsibility over to others. We live in a society that's highly segmented and specialized, and different people specialize in different things, but nobody has the vast general survival skill that a hunter-gatherer has. So in a global cataclysm, actually, at first counterintuitively, the people who would survive it would be the hunter-gatherers. And an advanced civilization would be smart, if they were survivors, to seek refuge amongst hunter-gatherers, to make that the place where they might try to restart their civilization. And that's why I think that this Australasian DNA signal in the Amazon may be part of the evidence for a sort of outreach effort that was being made by a lost civilization, seeing the disaster coming down on it and realizing that something needed to be done.
Well, it's fascinating to me that the geneticists would rely on the archaeologists, being that the geneticists have the actual DNA that they can examine, where the archaeologists are piecing things together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little tiny bits of information over the entire landscape.
Yeah.
And then you consider how much information they don't have access to that's in the ground.
Exactly.
There's so much.
I strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. I don't think it should be described as a science.
What do you think it should be described as?
It's more like a kind of philosophy. It's an attempt to interpret the past based on rather flimsy and limited evidence. And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out.
So the problem is drawing these conclusions and then being too rigid with these conclusions upon the further evidence.
That's my view.
Yeah.
That archaeology has been much too rigid, and that there's a climate of fear in archaeology. I don't mean to pick particularly on archaeologists here. I think this is generally true across other disciplines as well. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers. That's what they build their careers on. If they can get a paper on their bit of research published in Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, etc., that's good for their careers. But then you confront the gatekeepers in those publications who regard any archaeological idea that is not part of the mainstream accepted consensus with great suspicion and are most reluctant to publish that information.
Now, what is the mainstream when archaeologists talk about seafaring humans? What do they date that to?
Well, the
Polynesians, right?
The great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion. And it's a remarkable story. And that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating.
Did ancient civilizations master seafaring long before we thought possible? DNA evidence in the Amazon suggests Ice Age trans-Pacific voyages, challenging mainstream archaeology. Joe Rogan explores how institutional biases may be holding back the truth about our past. But what if we've only scratched the surface? The idea of advanced prehistoric societies leaving behind clues we're just beginning to grasp is both thrilling and humbling. Like and subscribe for more mind-blowing insights. Do you think archaeology is suppressing the truth, or are we looking in the wrong places? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.